The world is overflowing with mysterious places, but you need to know where to look. Some were carved by human hands, belonging to who? We don't know. For what purpose? We don't know. We just don't know very much. Others were shaped by nature's bizarre imagination, and a few simply exist in weird and wonderful spaces where reality and myth become blurred. Today we're going to look at 50 of the most fascinating, confounding, and downright bizarre places on the planet. So let's get into it. There is a pit in the middle of the Karachay Desert, far from just about anything. It's not a ditch, it's not a crack in the ground. No, this is a roaring, hissing, flaming hellhole, and they call it the door to hell, and frankly, it's a really good name for it. The thing looks like it should be surrounded by chanting cultists, not curious tourists in cargo shorts taking pictures. Stop with the cargo shorts. Like many disasters, it began with good intentions and, well, bad Soviet engineering. In 1971, a team of geologists drilling for natural gas hit something that they didn't expect, a cavern so large that their rig collapsed into it. The earth quite literally swallowed their equipment. What they'd uncovered was a pocket of gas, one leaking methane at such a rate that the team, in their infinite wisdom, decided the best course of action was to set it on fire, because of course not. But seriously, they did think that a quick burn-off would actually solve the problem. I mean, it'd be a few days, maybe a week. That was 50 years ago, and it's still going. What remains today is a 70-meter or 230-foot wide crater spewing fire into the air like a furnace. There's no off switch, and the flames leap several meters high, even in still air, while the temperature at the edge is enough to melt the soles of your shoes if you linger too long, so don't. The ground rumbles slightly beneath your feet, and the smell, something between scorched rubber and maybe Satan's barbecue, it's mesmerizing in the most unnerving way imaginable. Turkmenistan hasn't exactly been keen to broadcast this era. For years, the crater was not marked on maps, and even now, under the surreal rule of the current president, a man who banned car radios and lip-syncing, official attitudes towards the door to hell are pretty confused at best. He once declared it a hazard that should be extinguished, only to later perform donuts around it in a rally car for state TV. As the president does, right? Now, despite or perhaps because of its remoteness, the site draws a pretty strange crowd. Scientists come to study extremophile microbes that somehow survive in the heat. Tourists show up for selfies and to tick Hellmouth off their bucket lists. And then there was George Coronis, a Canadian adventurer who climbed inside wearing a heat-proof suit to collect samples. He described it like standing inside a blast furnace with the sound of 1,000 jet engines screaming in your ears. No one knows how much gas is still down there, and it could go out tomorrow or in another 100 years. The giant fire pit, lit by mistake, ignored by the world, and left to burn indefinitely, is a ferocious, flaming symbol of humanity's idiocy and our inability to clean up after ourselves. So for now, it keeps on burning, relentlessly. It was a casual decision taken 50 years ago that led to all of this. If there really is a door to hell, it just might be here. In the dead center of absolutely nowhere, or as close as you can get to it in the Komi Republic of northern Russia, there are 7 rock pillars rising from the landscape. Locals call them the Man-Papurna Rock Formation, and scientists will tell you that they're the result of erosion, but there's still something pretty transfixing about these stone towers. At a glance, they look like crude statues. Each one is between 30 and 42 meters tall, that's 100 and 140 feet, shaped vaguely like hunched giants or maybe frozen trolls. They're clumped together on a remote plateau in the Ural Mountains, but getting to them isn't straightforward. And that is putting it pretty kindly. You're talking several days' travel by snowmobile, helicopter, or a absolutely masochistic trek through thick taiga, soggy tundra, and patches of forest where the local wildlife still views humans with suspicion, and rightly so. Most people start from the Troitsko-Pechorsk village or the nearby Pechora Ilech Nature Reserve, but no matter your route, it is a slog. You better bring some money. I mean, a helicopter? Jesus. If you've ever fantasized about being the first explorer into some uncharted wilderness, this might be the closest you'll come, without actually dying. The place is remote, inhospitable, and eerily quiet. In winter, it looks like something out of a bleak Soviet-era fantasy novel. So, what are these things? Well, geologists say the pillars are made of weathered sericite and quartzite schist, a form of metamorphic rock. About 200 million years ago, this whole area was part of a high mountain chain, and over time, wind, water, frost, and temperature shifts wore down the softer rock, leaving behind these towering columns. That's the science, but there's plenty of folklore behind these rocks. The indigenous Mansi people have their own story, which, while less scientific, is actually more fun. According to legends, the rocks were once a group of shamans who tried to cross the Urals to destroy the Mansi people. Science is always ruining fun, isn't it? The gods, not too keen on that idea, struck them down and turned them to stone, which explains why one of the pillars is set apart from the others, facing them like he's about to deliver a sermon or pass a sentence. Today, the Manpapuna rocks are technically a Russian natural monument, and they've even been listed as one of the 7 wonders of Russia. Not that many people get to see them. There's no ticket booth, no queue, no laminated map with some red dots on it. Just you, the rocks, and the kind of silence that makes you rethink your life choices and the extensive and expensive journey you're going to be taking home. They don't do anything flashy, they're just there. But they've been there for a really long time, and they'll be there long after we're gone. Weathering, watching, waiting. Now, there's a patch of desert in northern Mexico where things start getting a bit strange. Radios crackle with static, compasses spin like they're drunk. Signals, be they from satellites, planes, or just your average mobile phone, they just seem to vanish into thin air. Sounds annoying. Locals call it the Zona del Silencio, or, just in case you couldn't guess, the Zone of Silence. And while the name alone sounds like something from a bad sci-fi B-movie, the place itself is unnervingly real. It lies in Mapimi Basin, straddling the borders of Durango, Coahuila, and Chihuahua. On paper, it's an arid stretch of nothing. Cacti, scorched soil, and a handful of hardy creatures that probably evolved out of sheer stubbornness. But for decades, it's been whispered about in UFO circles, conspiracy forums, and hushed tales from dusty cantinas. Supposedly, it shares a latitude with both the Bermuda Triangle, which is definitely a real thing, and the Egyptian pyramids, which are definitely a real thing. Though you'd have to squint at the map and do some generous rounding to make that stick. Still, people swear that there is something off about this place. The legend kicked off in 1970 when a test missile launched from the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico went wildly off course and crash-landed smack in the middle of the zone. A cleanup team arrived, and that's when the stories started surfacing. Animals with odd mutations, time behaving oddly, lights in the sky that flicker, hover, and then disappear without a trace. The Mexican government, in true government fashion, denied everything while quietly building a research station right in the middle of it. Nothing says nothing to see here like a brand new observatory. In the middle of the desert, right? The locals, for their part, they're unfazed. They tell stories of strange men who appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. Tall, blonde, oddly polite, which is surely the weirdest part of all. Others have spoken of sudden gusts of cold wind, dead zones where even the birds stop chirping, and moments of inexplicable silence so absolute that it presses on your eardrums. Skeptics chalk it all up to magnetic anomalies, mineral deposits, or the power of suggestion. Yes, as a skeptical man, I think they're probably right. What we do know for sure is that the area is littered with magnetite, uranium, and all sorts of trace elements that tend to mess with electronics. Well, there you go. Science ruining everything, isn't it? So what happens? Time was behaving. No, it wasn't. Stop. That would explain the radio weirdness, or maybe it wouldn't. Depending on who you ask, it's either a hotspot for geomagnetic disturbance, yes, or just a particularly unlucky patch of terrain. Either way, it's not the sort of place you go for a weekend hike unless you've got a flare gun and an above-average tolerance for existential unease. Just outside of the small village of Nowe Sezono in western Poland, there's a peculiar grove of pine trees that looks like they've lost a fight with gravity and decided to make peace with it. Around 400 trees, each one bent at the base into a tight, smooth curve before growing straight up again, like they all performed the same unnatural yoga pose and got stuck that way. The place is known simply as the Crooked Forest. These trees aren't actually the result of a natural disaster or genetic oddity. They were deliberately grown this way, which only raises more questions than it answers. The trees are all roughly the same age, planted in the early 1930s, and the curves begin about a foot above the ground, almost identically as if someone had trained them to grow that way using mechanical force or weights. Yet whoever did it never left a note, a blueprint, or even a half-decent rumor to explain what they were up to. The most widely accepted theory, because the accepted is generous in this context, is that local foresters or furniture makers bent the trees deliberately to produce curved timber for things like boat hulls or ox cart runners. The logic goes that if you want a natural curve, you shape the young tree and let nature do the slow, sappy, heavy lifting. But if that's the case, why abandon the project midway? Why not harvest them once they were fully grown? And why has no one else in the area ever heard of such a practice taking place? It's as if a secret society of arboreal sculptors showed up, did half a job, and then vanished. The forest isn't large, just a small patch amid otherwise perfectly normal woodlands, but walking through it is oddly disorientating. The curves draw your eyes downward and then upward again, as if the trees are mid-bow or caught in some sort of ballet. There's also the fact that it was all done in the early 1930s, just before the Second World War kicked off, so some speculate the project was interrupted by the invasion of Poland, though no documentation has ever surfaced to link the trees to any known wartime activity. Others go further, suggesting geomagnetic fields or gravitational anomalies did it, but these theories, well, they're nonsense. And then, of course, there are the UFO enthusiasts, because, why not throw in some alien landscaping into this perplexing mystery? Because, they'd travel all the way across the galaxy and then bend some trees. It makes complete sense. To this day, no definitive explanation has emerged. The crooked forest is just plain odd, and we have absolutely no idea why. Tucked away in the Nevada desert on a private land that used to be just another dusty corner of nowhere, Fly Geyser looks like it belongs on another planet. Or maybe it's the set of a very colourful, slightly confused sci-fi film. It's not particularly tall, just about 3.6 meters or 12 feet of mineral-stacked chaos, but it glows with vibrant colours that make the desert look like it gave up trying to compete. Red, green, yellow, turquoise, like someone spilled acid on a rainbow and it got angry. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking this geyser is some sort of ancient geothermal relic of Earth's wild and untamed past. It's good we tamed the Earth, isn't it? Tame that shit. But the truth is far more mundane, and somehow much weirder. The whole thing was an accident. Back in 1916, someone drilled a well looking for irrigation water and hit a geothermal pocket instead, with a torrent of hot water shooting to the surface. They capped it, shrugged, and moved on. Then in the 1960s, someone else thought, well, let's give that another go. Drilled another well just a few hundred meters away. They got the same result, only this time they didn't cap it properly, and the geyser has been vomiting boiling water ever since. As the superheated water spurted out, it brought with it dissolved minerals, which slowly built up over time into the bizarre alien mound that we have today. The vivid colors come from thermophilic algae, tiny organisms that love heat and don't mind living in extreme conditions, like microscopic squatters, if you will. Depending on the sunlight and the season, the geyser can shift in hue, turning an already surreal structure into a sort of geothermal mood ring. But despite how photogenic it is, Fly Geyser isn't exactly open to the public. It sits on land once owned by a private rancher, now managed by the Burning Man Project. That's the same people that run the giant art festival in the same part of the world. You can't just show up and expect to take selfies. You'll need a reservation, a guide, and a healthy respect for how blisteringly hot and weird the surrounding terrain is. Oh, there's also rattlesnakes around, lots of them apparently, so that's nice. What's strange is how little known it is. Most people, even Americans, haven't heard of Fly Geyser. It's not on postcards, it doesn't have a souvenir shop or a viewing deck, it just bubbles away quietly in the desert, growing a little more absurd with each passing year. It's an accidental marvel, a geological whoopsie that looks like Mother Nature tried her hand at sculpture after a few too many drinks. So, if you're ever in Nevada and find yourself wondering what to do after the slot machines and alien museums, consider heading north. You'll find something bubbling away in the desert, not entirely natural or artificial, but entirely mesmerizing. Just outside the grey stone walls of Dumbarton, a handsome little bridge arches over a deep gorge on the Overtoun estate. Built in the 1890s, Overtoun Bridge looks like some sort of romantic landmark that you might see on a biscuit tin, ivy crawling along its parapets, the Scottish Highlands rolling beyond it, and a peaceful stream far below. But it's picked up a far darker nickname, the Dog Suicide Bridge. For decades, locals and visitors alike have reported something deeply unsettling here. Dogs, healthy, regularly happy dogs, have leapt off the same side of the bridge, plunging to their deaths on the rocks below. The The pattern is so consistent that animal behaviorists, spiritualists, and paranormal investigators have all tried to explain it. Some estimates say that as many as 50 dogs have died this way since the 1950s, with others seriously injured after jumping from the same stretch of parapet. Owners say that the dogs behave normally right up until the moment they cross the bridge. Why not put a fence there? What's going on? After like the first 10 dogs, you're not like just put a fence up? What's going on, Scotland? Sorry. Then without warning, they bolt for the wall and jump, almost as if they're compelled by something they can't see. Of course, theories abound here. Skeptics believe the explanation is purely natural, the scent of mink or other wildlife drifting up from the gorge below, carried by swirling currents of winds that dogs with their sharp noses can detect long before humans do. The dogs catch a whiff, fixate on the scent, and charge straight over the side. The bridge's sloped stone walls and height don't offer much of a barrier once a determined animal makes that decision. Overtoun has long had a reputation as a thin place where the veil between worlds is said to be weak. Locals whisper that the land is steeped in a kind of ancient grief, pointing to the bridge's connection with tragic stories from the family that once owned the estate. There's talk of so-called White Lady who wanders the grounds in sorrow, and some believe animals, more sensitive than humans, might sense something that drives them into panic, or something worse. Dun, dun, dun. The bridge is open today, though a warning sign has gone up asking owners to leash their pets before crossing. It's a sensible step in a place where logic and folk memory seem to collide. Overtoun Bridge doesn't look frightening, it doesn't hiss or creak or put on any grand display of menace. But if you believe even half the stories, there's something there that unsettles more than just dogs. There's something in the air, or in the stones, or in our heads. North of Taipei, along Taiwan's coast, once stood a cluster of structures that looked like the Jetsons crash-landed mid-holiday. Sanji Pod Village, nicknamed the UFO Village, was meant to be a luxury seaside getaway for military officers and the well-to-do. What it became was a graveyard of fiberglass saucers, abandoned mid-construction and left to rot under the subtropical sun. It all started in the late 70s, powered by big dreams and bolder architecture. Think circular pods, stacked and linked by narrow walkways perched on concrete stilts like alien landing craft waiting for takeoff. The 1970s, everybody. It was supposed to be sleek, futuristic, and wildly exclusive. Instead, it nosedived straight into disaster. Almost from day one, the project seemed cursed. Construction accidents mounted, some fatal, while financial backers folded and developers quietly backed away. Then came the whispers that the land was haunted, that it sat atop a burial ground, that a dragon statue at the entrance had been broken, wrecking the feng shui and dooming the entire endeavor. Whether you buy the supernatural angle or not, the place definitely had an energy, and it wasn't the spa weekend at the beach kind of energy. Disappointingly. By the early 1980s, it was abandoned entirely. There were no guests, no ribbon cutting, just rows of decaying pods, their paint peeling and windows shattered, slowly being consumed by vines and humidity. It didn't look like a failed resort so much as the set of a post-apocalyptic sci-fi film that no one ever finished shooting. For years, urban explorers and curious wanderers slipped past half-hearted fencing to poke around the ruins. Some claimed to hear whispers or footsteps. Others just marveled at the absurd beauty of it, retro-futurism being eaten alive by tropical neglect. The government seemed undecided what to do with it, half threatening demolition, half pretending it wasn't there. Eventually, in 2008, they knocked it all down, quietly, without ceremony, just machines and dust, and then barely a trace of it was left. A few cracked foundations, some weathered concrete, and that's it. The dream of the Jetson-style paradise had rusted out quietly in the heat. Where the Taylor Glacier meets Lake Bonny in East Antarctica, a stream of deep red water leaks through the ice. It stains the surrounding glacier like a gash, oozing something that looks disturbingly like blood, and unsurprisingly, it's got the name Blood Falls. The name's a bit dramatic, but then again, so is the site. The phenomenon was first spotted in 1911 by an Australian expedition. At the time, they assumed red algae who were to blame, a nice and tidy organic explanation. But they were wrong. What's actually coming out of the glacier is blood. No, it's not blood, it's iron-rich brine. And when the salty water hits the air, the iron oxidizes or rusts, turning it a deep red. The real story lies where this water comes from. Deep under the glacier, about 300 meters or 1,000 feet down, is a lake sealed off from the surface for at least 2 million years. There's no sunlight, no oxygen, and no contact with the outside world, yet somehow microbial life still exists down there. Which is super cool. Let's go find aliens. These not in the lake, I mean on like other planets and stuff. It's called just life is everywhere, it seems. These microbes survive on iron and sulfate using chemical reactions that most life on Earth doesn't need. It's an ecosystem entirely independent from the surface one. This isn't just a curiosity, it is a scientific goldmine. That sealed ecosystem provides one of the best analogues we have for life on other worlds. I was just saying, it's so cool. Jupiter's moon Europa and Saturn's Enceladus are both icy, potentially salty, and could host similar conditions beneath their surfaces. If life can survive under a glacier on Earth, it might survive under the ice elsewhere too. Budfalls itself is unpredictable. It doesn't flow constantly, it pulses depending on changes in pressure under the glacier. Every surge releases a bit more of the ancient brine, carrying with it microbes that have been isolated for millennia. Despite how dramatic it looks, it's not particularly large. The outflow is narrow and short-lived when active, but its scientific significance outweighs the spectacle. Ancient water, extreme microbes, and active geochemical processes in such a remote place make it a rare intersection of geology, biology, and planetary science. I've been to this one. In the northern highlands of Laos, thousands of massive stone jars lie scattered across the landscape. Some are barely knee-high, while others stand taller than a person. Most are cracked and lichen-covered abandoned vessels with no clear explanation. This is the Plain of Jars, a mystery carved in stone and left out in the open. The jars are concentrated in clusters across the Xiankoyang Plateau, carved mostly from sandstone and a few from tougher stone. Some still have lids, but none have writing. Archaeologists date them to around 500 BCE, but the exact purpose remains debated. Theories range from burial urns to fermentation vats to rainwater collectors. The only thing everyone agrees on is that they're not modern and they weren't placed at random. One site contains hundreds ranged in patterns that suggest some form of ritual use. Human remains and burial artifacts have been found nearby, supporting the idea that they were used in funerary rites. But if they were part of an ancient cemetery, where are the graves? Where are the dwellings, the temples? It's like finding a dining set and finding no table or kitchen or house. Local legend has its own take. The jars, people say, were made by giants to brew rice wine after winning a great battle. Whether or not you believe in giants, you shouldn't. I mean, a giant person is a real thing, but giants as a no. The image is hard to shake. A battlefield party so wild that the glassware got left behind. More recently, the Plain of Jars has taken on another grimmer layer. During the Vietnam War, the US dropped more bombs on Laos than on Germany and Japan combined, and many landed right here, and today unexploded bombs remain scattered in the region. Some jar sites have been cleared, while others are still too dangerous to access. The past and present are uneasily stacked, with ancient stone resting in soil that can still kill. Beneath the streets of Paris lies a second city, older, darker, and considerably more crowded. It's not marked on tourist maps or metro lines, but it is very real. The catacombs stretch for miles under the French capital, a subterranean ossuary holding the remains of over 6 million people. Bones line the walls in tight geometric patterns, skulls stare blankly from alcoves, and it all just sits a few stories below the cafes and boutiques above. The problem started back in the 1700s. Paris was running out of space to bury its dead. Cemeteries overflowed, and in some places, corpses were literally seeping through the ground into neighboring buildings. One graveyard, Les Innocents, was so badly decomposed that it began to infect the surrounding air and the residents. People were getting sick from being too close to rotting dead bodies. So the authorities did what made the most sense. They started moving the remains underground. Luckily, Paris already had a network of tunnels, old limestone quarries left over after centuries of building. Beginning in 1786, the city began transferring bodies from its cemeteries into these unused shafts. What started as a practical storage solution turned into a monumental project. Over the decades, bones from hundreds of thousands of graves were exhumed and carted below the surface. At first, the bones were dumped in heaps, but in the early 1800s, an official named Louis-Étienne Ericard de Thury decided the space needed tidying up. Marie Kondo, I suppose, would have loved him. He oversaw the careful stacking of skulls and femurs into walls, columns, and other arrangements. Quotes from philosophers were etched into stone plaques. Today, only a small portion of the catacombs are open to the public, a narrow stretch of tunnel roughly a mile long. But it's enough to get the point across. The space is dimly lit and eerily quiet, with row upon row of bones arranged like morbid wallpaper. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and the air has a damp, mineral tang. But that's only the visible layer. Beyond the official path lies an entire world of sealed tunnels and forgotten chambers. These off-map catacombs attract a different crowd: urban explorers, squatters, artists, and thrill-seekers who call themselves cataphiles. Some host underground parties or paint murals in the dark, others simply wander. Maps exist, passed quietly between those in the know, but they're incomplete. Getting lost is a real danger, and a few people have. The catacombs are more than a curiosity. They're infrastructure, a literal foundation of human remains supporting the modern city. A few million Parisians above, 6 million more below. In Homestead, Florida, one of the country's strangest structures is hidden behind low trees and modest signage. Coral Castle looks like something ancient engineers or aliens left behind on a lunch break. It's made entirely from oolitic limestone or coral rock, cut and stacked into walls, gates, furniture, and sculptures. Some blocks weigh more than 30 tons, and one man built it all by himself. His name was Edward Leedskalnin, a Latvian immigrant barely 5 feet tall and weighing under 100 pounds. He didn't have a crew, he didn't have a crane, and he had no formal training. Just decades of solitary work, mostly at night. He used basic hand tools, a homemade pulley system, and allegedly something else. Something mysterious. Neighbors claim to see him levitating rocks. Or maybe he's just using those pulleys. Others say he moved them like they were weightless. Leedskalnin himself never explained, and when asked, he only said he knew the secrets of the pyramids. The castle isn't just heavy, it's precise. There's a 9-ton door that could be spun on its axis with a finger, a telescope aimed at the North Star, a sundial accurate to within a minute. Chairs, beds, tables, fountains, they're all carved from stone, balanced and aligned. He worked with no blueprints and no audience, just stubbornness and heartbreak. And that last part is important. Leedskalnin said he built Coral Castle for a woman, Agnes Scuffs, the fiancée who left him the day before their wedding. He called her his Sweet 16, though she was 10 years younger and never came to Florida. After the breakup, Leedskalnin left Europe, landed in Florida, and spent the rest of his life building what might be the world's heaviest love letter. Construction began in the 1920s and continued into the 1940s, and originally, as if this wasn't impressive enough, it stood in Florida City, but in 1936, Leedskalnin moved the entire structure 10 miles north to its current site in Homestead. He did this quietly, at night, with little help. Truck drivers who assisted said Leedskalnin loaded and unloaded the stones himself. They were told to wait outside. After he died in 1951, reportedly after starving himself, the site was open to the public. Engineers and scientists have since studied the castle, trying to understand how he did it. Some theories point to clever leverage, counterweights, and an intuitive grasp of physics, but no one has fully replicated his methods without modern equipment. And bear in mind, we're talking about over 1,000 tons of stone here. Today, Coral Castle is part roadside oddity, part engineering puzzle. It's not flashy, there are no rides, just coral blocks cut with precision, placed with care, and left to weather in the Florida heat. Leedskalnin never married, he never explained himself, he just kept on building. Where Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana meet, Mount Roraima rises out of the jungle like a stone slab dropped from the sky. Towering over the surrounding rainforest, it's not just a mountain, it's a tepui, part of a unique class of flat-top formations found in the Guianan highlands. And at 2,810 meters, or 9,219 feet, with a summit spanning 31 square kilometers, or 12 square miles, it's among the largest and most iconic. The sides are sheer cliffs, vertical, smooth, and difficult to climb without gear. From a distance, Roraima looks less like a mountain and more like the Earth just decided to stop trying and just leave a corner unfinished. It's also the original inspiration for The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The book's premise, a prehistoric world located on a plateau, was directly drawn from Roraima's strange geography. Reaching the summit requires a 3-day trek through rainforest and across the Gran Sabana Plateau. Hikers typically begin in the Venezuelan town of Paraguay, and the route includes muddy paths, river crossings, and a final scramble up a natural slope on the mountain's south face, the only non-technical route to the top. Once on the summit, the environment shifts dramatically. The surface is primarily black sandstone, weathered into surreal shapes by wind and rain over hundreds of millions of years. Pools of rainwater collect in craters, mist rolls in and out without warning, temperatures drop and visibility vanishes. The air is cooler and damp, often feeling more like highland tundra than tropical jungle. The top of Roraima supports an ecosystem found nowhere else on Earth. Roughly 1/3 of the plant species up there are endemic. Some grow directly from the rock, others, like certain carnivorous plants, thrive in the nutrition-poor soil by digesting insects, while a few species of frogs and invertebrates have also adapted to life on the isolated plateau. It's a natural laboratory of evolution, shaped by isolation and harsh conditions. Indigenous people, like the Perman and Kapon, regard the mountain as sacred. Their oral histories describe it as the stump of a mythical tree felled by a god named Mokele-mbembe, scattering the fruits of the earth across the land. The mountain, they say, is what's left of that tree. It's a really big tree. Roraima's isolation, difficult access, and otherworldly summit continue to attract scientists and trekkers alike. But unlike many famous peaks, it resists easy tourism. There are no permanent structures or facilities at the top, just wind, rock, and water. At the base of Mount Fuji, where volcanic rock litters the ground and daylight battles through the treetops, lies Aokigahara, also known as the Sea of Trees. It's a dense, quiet, and unnervingly still place. The forest covers 35 square kilometers or 14 square miles, and once you're inside, everything, sound, direction, even time, it feels muffled. The porous lava underfoot absorbs noise, while compasses spin unpredictably. It's a place that confuses the senses. Aokigahara has a long association with death. In folklore, it's linked to eerie, restless spirits of the dead, and was once rumored to be the site of ubasute, a mythical practice of leaving the elderly to die in the wilderness. Lovely. There's little proof that ever happened, but the legend stuck. In modern times, it gained a darker reputation after the 1960s novel Nami no To depicted lovers taking their lives in the forest. Since then, it's been known grimly as Japan's suicide forest. Authorities do not release numbers anymore, but past estimates put the annual death toll in the dozens. Warning signs are posted at trailheads urging visitors to seek help, talk to family, and call support lines. Search teams occasionally patrol the area. It's also Logan Paul. Jesus. Most people come here to hike or explore, but some come for other reasons, bringing string to mark their path, just in case they decide to return. But Aokigahara is more than macabre headline, it's also strikingly beautiful. Thick moss blankets, the rocks, trees twist in strange directions shaped by wind and lava flows, ice caves and hidden tunnels pocket the landscape. On clear days, you can catch a glimpse of Mount Fuji through breaks in the canopy, and it's not hard to see why some people come here seeking solitude. True solitude, not death. Just distance from everything else. Yet, of course, the forest has its stories. Visitors talk of whispers, shadows, strange lights. Some swear they've been followed, though they saw no one. Strings tied between trees appear like bright spider webs in the gloom. Some old, some recent, some snapped. It's easy to get lost here, and easier still to not want to be found. In western Madagascar, where the ground seems to have gone feral, you'll find one of the most bizarre landscapes on Earth. The Tsingy de Bemaraha roughly translates as where one cannot walk barefoot, is a jagged limestone forest made entirely of razor-sharp stone. Not figuratively sharp, it's literally sharp, the kind of terrain that turns a stumble into a medical emergency. The formations, known as Tsingy, are sculpted over millions of years as rainwater or acidic runoff eroded the porous limestone. The result is a sprawling labyrinth of spires, canyons, and knife-edged ridges, some over 90 meters or 300 feet tall, forming a stone skyline that looks like the aftermath of a tectonic temper tantrum. From above, it resembles a frozen forest of grey needles. From below, it's like being inside a rock blender. Navigation isn't casual. This isn't the sort of place you wander through in flip-flops, alright? Paths are narrow, vertical, and often require harnesses, ladders, and fixed cables. You're clambering through crevices barely wider than your shoulders or crossing rope bridges suspended between limestone towers. Hikers wear gloves to avoid slicing their hands on the rocks, and even the park's best-known trails feel more like obstacle courses designed by some sort of sadistic mountain goat. And yet, life thrives here. Somehow, in the cracks and crevices, you'll find unique orchids, mosses, and even entire trees growing from what looks like solid rock. Lemurs, several species of them, leap effortlessly between spars. Birds and bats roost in narrow caves. Tiny reptiles dart across ledges like they've lived here for millennia, which in many cases they have. Over 80% of the species in the park are endemic. Evolution in the Tsingy isn't just about survival, but about extreme adaptation. The national park, which is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, also includes mangroves, dry forests, and hidden rivers running beneath the stone. Some of the caves are vast, with underground chambers that remain largely unexplored. Scientists studying the region are still finding new species, especially in the darker, more remote corners. Getting there is absolutely not a small feat. You'll need to brave bone-rattling tracks, river crossings by makeshift ferry, and a logistical maze of permits, guides, and patience. But the effort does pay off. There's no other landscape like it. Alien, vertical, and violently indifferent to your comfort. Just off the Bronx, in a quiet stretch of the East River, lies an island most New Yorkers have never seen and few could name. It's called North Brother Island, and despite sitting within shouting distance of Manhattan, it might as well belong to another world. Overgrown, abandoned, and sealed to the public, it's a 20-acre time capsule of quarantine wards, empty halls, and ghost stories rooted in facts. The island's official history begins in the 1880s, when city officials, faced with growing public health threats, needed somewhere to isolate patients with contagious diseases. Far enough to avoid contamination, close enough for easy ferry access. North Brother fitted the bill. Riverside Hospital was established here to treat smallpox, tuberculosis, typhus, and other infectious diseases at a time when treatment often meant containment. The island soon grew into a full-scale medical compound with separate buildings for staff, patients, and supplies. Its most infamous resident was Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary. She was the first person in the United States identified as a healthy carrier of typhoid fever. Despite being warned, she continued working as a cook, infecting dozens of people. After repeated violations, she was forcibly quarantined on North Brother Island in 1915. She lived there for over 2 decades until her death in 1938, never truly accepting the science behind her exile. Tragedy also struck from the outside. In 1904, the passenger steamship General Slocum caught fire in the East River, just off the island's shore. Over 1,000 people, mostly women and children on a church outing, died in what remains one of America's worst maritime disasters. Many of the bodies were brought ashore here, and the island became an impromptu morgue for the dead. Following World War II, the island found one last purpose. The hospital buildings were repurposed as a rehabilitation center for teenage drug users, but the program quickly spiraled into dysfunction with reports of mistreatment and neglect. By the early 1960s, the facility shut down for good. Staff left, patients were removed, and North Brother Island was left to rot. Nature moved in almost immediately. Vines choked stairwells, trees grew through the floors, birds nested in collapsed rafters. Today, the island is a protected nesting site for herons and egrets, and the city strictly controls entry. No public tours, no casual visits, just the remains of tiled walls, crumbling docks, and rusting beds in dust-coated silence. Despite being surrounded by millions of people, North Brother Island remains out of sight and out of reach. Its ruins visible from the shore, but barely, with the buildings standing just intact enough to hint at the fact that there was once life there. It's not haunted in the traditional sense, but it does carry a weight of disease, disaster, isolation, and abandonment. Few places in New York feel more forgotten, and fewer still have seen so much. In the Namib Desert, where the sand runs red and the sun does not blink, a strange pattern spreads across the ground like nature forgot to finish the job. They're called fairy circles, thousands of almost perfect rings of bare earth, each rimmed by a tidy halo of grass. From above, the landscape looks like it's been stung by a swarm of geometric bees. They stretch across hundreds of miles in Namibia and southern Angola. Some are just a few feet wide, others reach 12 meters or 40 feet across. And they aren't scattered at random. The circles cluster in tight, repeating grids with enough regularity to make satellite images look artificially generated. But they're all real. And for decades, no one's been entirely sure why they're there. One of the earliest theories blamed termites. The idea was that subterranean colonies were eating the roots of plants from below, clearing patches and letting moisture collect at the edges where grasses could grow. This fits with some field studies until researchers found identical circles in areas without any termite activity at all. Other suggestions have included toxic gases, fungal growth, or even radioactive soil. And inevitably, someone has floated aliens, because of course they did. More recently, ecologists have leaned toward a theory of self-organization, where in extreme environments like this, water is scarce and plants may space themselves out to avoid competition, and by forming rings, they maximize access to moisture and nutrients, creating a natural feedback system that keeps the pattern going. There are no insects, no gases, just the plants doing the maths. The Himba people of Namibia have their own stories. Some say the circles are the footprints of gods. Others believe they're made by spirits dancing at night, or the breath of dragons sleeping beneath the sand. All of which is definitely real. These explanations might sound fantastical, and that's because they are. But what makes the fairy tale circles so compelling is their persistence. Researchers have measured the soil, monitored rainfall, tested for microbial life, and tracked satellite images for decades, and yet the phenomenon remains largely unresolved. It's not just one cause, it might be many, working in ways that we don't fully understand. Seen from the air, the circles are mesmerizing, stark, circular, and impossibly uniform. They create the illusion of order in an otherwise chaotic landscape. On the ground, they're quieter, just bare patches of earth surrounded by scrub. But even then, there's something slightly off about them. They're not magic. They're not a hoax. They're just unexplained and unmistakable. In the Venetian lagoon, just a short boat ride from the polished marble of Venice, sits a small island that looks perfectly ordinary from a distance. I've seen this one. Trees, old brickwork, nothing out of place. But locals don't go there. Some won't even say its name. The island is called Poveglia, and it might be Italy's darkest patch of land. Its history reads like a checklist of human misery. In the 1700s, Venice used Poveglia as a quarantine zone during repeated plague outbreaks, but quarantine is a really nice way of putting it. Infected people were shipped here en masse, often against their will, and just left to die. Thousands were buried in pits or burned in open-air pyres, with some estimates suggesting over 100,000 people died. The soil, they say, is more ash than earth. When the plague years passed, the island sat idle, until someone had the idea to build an asylum there. In the early 20th century, Poveglia was converted into a psychiatric hospital, a remote facility where troubled patients could be kept out of sight. The conditions were bleak, and that's saying the least. Reports mention crude surgeries, forced treatments, and isolation cells. One story, probably exaggerated, but who really knows when it comes to the gruesome world of asylum care, tells a story of a doctor who performed lobotomies until he lost his mind and fell or was pushed from the bell tower. I think I made a video about that, and it's a myth. Locals say you can still hear the bell, even though it was removed decades ago. You can't. The asylum closed in 1968, and since then the island has been abandoned. Buildings rot in silence, walls crumble, ivy climbs through broken windows. Trees have grown thick, not in a romantic, overgrown ruin kind of way, but like the island is slowly trying to hide itself. No one lives here, no one works here. No ferries stop here. It's officially off-limits. The Italian government has blocked access for years, citing safety and preservation. A few explorers have managed to sneak in. Journalists, thrill-seekers, ghost hunters. Some come back shaken, some don't talk about it. Stories swirl of shadows in doorways, whispers in empty halls, and the inexplicable feeling that you're not alone. There have been attempts to redevelop it. A few years ago, investors floated plans for a luxury hotel, but that quietly collapsed. Another project proposed a public park, but that went nowhere. Every proposal hits a wall. Permits, money, timing. Or maybe nobody quite has it in them to bring fun to a place of such horror. In the southeast corner of Romania, near the Black Sea, and surrounded by nothing more than farmlands, lies a patch of ground with no sign of what's beneath it. No markings, no warning, it's just a concrete slab. But under that slab is one of the strangest ecosystems on the planet. Movile Cave. Sealed off from the surface for over 5 million years, it was discovered by accident in 1986 when workers drilling for a power plant cracked into it. What they found wasn't oil or gas. It was a world that had evolved without sunlight, oxygen, or any contact with the outside. Inside, the conditions are toxic. The air's thick with hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and ammonia. Oxygen hovers at just 7 to 10%, about half of what we're used to. There's no light, no fresh air, and the whole place, well, it stinks of rotten eggs. Yet somehow, life absolutely thrives here. Not just a few microbes, but a whole web of weirdness. More than 50 species of invertebrates have been identified so far, and most of them exist nowhere else. These creatures don't rely on photosynthesis, they survive through chemosynthesis, a process where bacteria feed on the cave's sulfur compounds, forming a microbial mat that supports worms, spiders, millipedes, and water scorpions. Which is a new terrifying thing I had no idea existed 30 seconds ago. Some are blind, others have no pigment. Most look like the kind of thing you'd expect to find under a microscope or, well, in your nightmares. The food chain starts with chemistry here, not sunlight. Access is tightly controlled. You enter through a narrow shaft, descend ladders, and squeeze through passages half flooded with sulfuric sludge. Only a handful of researchers are allowed in at a time, and even then visits are short. The atmosphere corrodes electronics and eats through lungs, but what they find is priceless, a model for how life could exist in the most extreme places. And that's why NASA's interested. Movile Cave is the closest thing we have to an alien ecosystem on Earth. If life can develop in a dark, poisonous pocket under Romanian farmlands, it might also exist under the crust of Europa or buried in Martian rock. No sun, no sky, just the right chemistry. From the surface, it looks like nothing, but below, it's a 5 million-year-old experiment still running. Just off the coast of Belize, in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, sits a perfect circle of deep blue water that looks like the ocean is missing a piece. It's called the Great Blue Hole, not a poetic name, but an accurate one. It's a sinkhole, wide, round, and so deep it turns the sea nearly black. It measures around 305 meters or 1,000 feet across and drops 125 meters or 410 feet straight down into limestone bedrock. It's part of the Belize Barrier Reef, the second largest reef system in the world, and from above, it doesn't look real. Just a dark, navy eye in a sea of turquoise, ringed with coral and perfectly symmetrical, as if the ocean punched a hole in itself and then forgot to patch it. The Blue Hole was popularized by Jacques Cousteau in 1971 when he brought his research vessel, the Calypso, to explore it. He declared it one of the world's top dive sites, and for good reason. Diving here is like descending into a vertical cave. The first 100 feet or so are startlingly clear. Then the limestone walls peel back into massive underwater chambers filled with stalactites. These formations could only have formed in dry air, which tells us something really strange. This place was once a cave above sea level. That was during the last ice age, but as glaciers melted and sea levels rose, the cave flooded. Eventually, the roof collapsed, creating the enormous sinkhole that we see today. It's not just a dive site, it's a flooded fossil. But make no mistake, it's also really dangerous. The deeper you go, the darker and deadlier it gets. At around 300 feet or 91 meters, oxygen vanishes and hydrogen sulfide takes over. Visibility drops. At least 3 people have died in the Blue Hole, and probably several that we don't know of. In 2018, a team led by Richard Branson sent a submersible to the bottom. They mapped it in 3D, confirmed the strange chemistry, and even found the remains of 2 divers who disappeared years earlier. There were no sea monsters, no lost cities. There was just a lot of silence. Despite all the studies, some questions remain. Why is it so perfectly round? Why is it here in such shallow water? What other ancient structures might lie buried in reef and stone? Scientists can explain a lot, but the Blue Hole has still got a few secrets that it's keeping to itself. From the surface, it's beautiful, from the air hypnotic, but up close, it's pretty unnerving. One moment you're floating above coral gardens, the next you're peering into a cold, vertical tunnel that vanishes into blackness. Down there is no light, there is no sound, there's just nothing. Deep in the Peruvian Amazon, hours from the nearest road and hidden beneath the jungle canopy, there is a river that shouldn't exist. It's called Shenay Timbishka, boiled with the heat of the sun in the local language, and the name is not an exaggeration. This river is hot, scalding, steaming, flesh-peeling hot. And the strangest part, it's nowhere near a volcano, which is the usual source for such heat. The river winds through the forest about 6.4 kilometers or 4 miles, and in some places, the water reaches over 93 Celsius, that's 200 Fahrenheit. That's nearly boiling point. Steam pours off the surface like fog in Fast Forward, and frogs that fall into it don't hop back out, while birds that misjudge a landing get poached. The banks are marked with dead roots and scorched mud, nature's version of a warning sign. The world outside the Amazon knew little about it until geophysicist Andres Russo followed a childhood story from his grandfather and went looking for it. He expected a tall tale, but what he found was a natural phenomenon barely documented by science. His research helped confirm the river's extreme heat and forced scientists to confront a geological oddity. How can water get this hot without any volcanic activity nearby? The answer, or at least the best working theory, lies deep underground. Cracks in the Earth's crust, faults invisible at the surface, may allow rainwater to seep down far enough to heat up from geothermal pressure. That superheated water then rushes back to the surface and pours into the riverbed, cooking everything in its path. It's geothermal plumbing on a hyperlocal scale, rare, unstable, and still not entirely understood. But while science tries to map the system, the local people have always seen the river differently. To them, Shenei Timpishka isn't just curiosity, it's sacred. A place where the earth speaks through steam and heat. For generations, they've used the river in rituals, healing, and stories. It's not a tourist attraction to them, it's alive. Getting there is an ordeal in itself, though. You'll need permission, a guide, and a strong tolerance for humidity and mosquito bites. The journey includes hours of jungle trekking, river crossings, and a slow realization that the air is warming not from the sun, but from something underground. When you arrive, the effect is immediate. The hiss of the water, the thick, damp heat. The smell is earthy, minerally, faintly sulfuric. There are no fences, no platforms, no safety briefings or park rangers, just a river that runs too hot for comfort, hidden in the middle of one of the planet's wildest places. High in the Indian Himalayas, tucked away between crags and glaciers in Uttarakhand, there's a lake that spends most of the year frozen and silent. It's called Roopkund, and for a few short weeks each summer, the ice melts just enough to reveal what lies beneath. Not rocks, not fish, but bones. Hundreds of human skeletons strewn along the shore and lying eerily intact in the water. This is not a legend, it's not a burial ground, it's something far stranger. Roopkund sits more than 5,000 meters or 16,000 feet above sea level, in a place that sees few visitors and offers few explanations. The skeletons were discovered during World War II, and early reports assumed that they were soldiers, but the bones were too old, and there were too many. Later tests dated most of them to the 9th century, around 850 AD, though some appear centuries younger. And then came the DNA results. They revealed two distinct populations, one local, likely from South Asia, and another with clear Eastern Mediterranean ancestry. This means that at least some of the dead, hundreds of them in fact, were not just lost hikers or local travelers. They came from across continents, and they died here together. The leading theory is pretty brutal. Around 1,200 years ago, a sudden hailstorm struck the group with ice balls the size of cricket balls. The trauma pattern supported it. Cracked skulls, broken shoulders, no defensive wounds, a fast lethal barrage from above. And strangely, local folklore tells a similar story, a royal party cursed by the gods and struck down by stones from the sky. But that only solves part of the mystery. Why were Mediterranean travelers here in the first place? Roopkund isn't a trade route, it isn't near a city or temple. Some think it was a pilgrimage, others suspect a royal expedition gone wrong. Nothing is confirmed, and the mix of populations only deepens the confusion. The remains are hauntingly well preserved. High altitude and cold air have kept them intact for centuries. When the ice retreats, bones appear beside scraps of fabric, wooden walking sticks, and leather sandals. There are no monuments or markers, no names, just fragments of people who were caught off guard and never left. The site has been restricted in recent years to prevent further damage. Still, some make the journey, and when they arrive, they don't find answers. Roopkund doesn't even offer much in the way of clues, just bones, visible for a while, and then buried again by snow, a frozen question mark in the mountains. By day, Kawah Ijen could almost fool you. The crater lake sits peacefully, its turquoise waters shimmering under the East Java sun, surrounded by jagged rock and the faint haze of steam. It looks calm, maybe even inviting, if you don't know any better. But wait until night falls. That's when the mountain shows its true face, and it is something straight out of a nightmare. That's when the flames begin to dance, but this is not the warm orange or yellow that you'd expect, but cold, electric blue, and frankly pretty damn scary. The science behind it is actually pretty simple, although it hardly makes it less eerie. Gases rich in sulfur pour from vents in the crater, superheated to over 600 Celsius or 1100 Fahrenheit, and as they hit the air, they ignite. The blue glow isn't the flame itself, It's the sulfur burning so hot it emits light at a different wavelength. By daylight, you'd never know it's there, but the mountain roars to life at night with ghostly fire and the smell of rotten eggs fills the air. And then there's the lake. Don't let the colour fool you, it's no tropical paradise. Kawah Ijen's crater lake holds the title of the largest acidic lake on Earth, with a pH sitting snugly at around 0.5, roughly the same as battery acid. The water's stunning shade of aquamarine comes from dissolved metals, but do not be tempted to dip a toe, as one splash could severely burn skin. The air above it isn't much better, thick with sulfur fumes that sting the eyes and claw at the lungs. What really sticks with you, though, isn't just the flames or the acid, it's the miners. Every day, dozens of men descend into that crater to chip out chunks of solid sulfur. No fancy machinery, no protective gear apart from maybe a scrap of cloth tied around their faces. They hack at the deposits, load up baskets that can weigh 90 kilograms or 200 pounds, haul them back up to the crater rim, barefoot or in flip-flops, and then down the mountain. For this, they earn a pittance. The work leaves them scarred, their lungs damaged, their teeth eroded by the fumes, but they keep doing it because they don't have a choice. Tourists come to see the show, of course. Guides lead treks up the mountain in the dead of night so people can snap photos of the flames. It's hard not to marvel at the sight, but there is a heavy price being paid for those who live and work in the region. Kawah Ijen isn't just beautiful or dangerous, it's both in the same breath. A place where nature puts on a dazzling display while quietly killing you from the inside out. Out in the desert sands of Sudan, a couple of 100 miles north of Khartoum, you'll find pyramids rising from the ochre earth. Dozens of them, more than in Egypt, in fact. And yet, hardly anyone outside Sudan seems to know they exist. These are the pyramids of the Meroë, the ancient royal burial grounds of the Kingdom of Kush, and they look like someone took the pharaoh's blueprints and then rewrote them with a different accent and a dash of drama. Meroë was once the beating heart of the Kushite Empire, a civilization controlling trade, ironworking, and vast stretches of the Nile corridor. The city flourished for centuries, its rulers adapting the pyramid-building styles they'd seen in Egypt, but giving them a distinct twist. Kushite pyramids are steeper, narrower, and often built in tight clusters that look like a miniature skyline for the gods. Some stand barely 9 meters or 30 feet tall, others rise over 30 meters or 100 feet, but all share that same striking angle. There are more than 200 pyramids in total, many of them built between 2,700 and 2,300 years ago. The royal dead were interred beneath them in underground chambers sealed with goods for the afterlife, pottery, jewelry, weapons, and the usual trappings of a well-sent monarch. But over the centuries, grave robbers did their work, breaking into many tombs and leaving behind scattered debris and half-shattered statues. But there's plenty of mystery here. Why did this place become the pyramid capital of Kush? And why did its culture slip through the cracks of popular history? The Kushites were no minor players. At one point, they ruled Egypt itself as its 25th dynasty, marching north to take control of the pharaonic throne. Their influence spread as far as Palestine, and their queens, the Kandakis, were powerful enough to negotiate with the Romans on equal terms. Yet the story of the Meroë faded, buried under colonial neglect, shifting sands, and a world that fixated on geyser alone. If you walk among these pyramids today, you'll see damage from 19th century treasure hunters, especially one Italian explorer who blew holes in their sides with dynamite looking for gold. He found little, but left scars that will outlast him by thousands of years. Even so, the pyramids remain astonishing. Some still carry faint images of gods and royals carved in Nubian script, a language we can only partly read. The desert light catches their angles perfectly at dawn, giving them a warmth and a mystery that cameras never quite capture. Few tourists make it to Meroë, which is a shame, but let's be honest, you don't get many roughing it into the blazing desert of Sudan. There are no crowds or sound apart from the wind coming across the sand. You can stand in the doorway of a ruined tomb and look down a row of pyramid peaks, a royal cemetery that once watched over an empire that vanished almost without a trace. Up in the rugged expanse of Judge C.R. Magnay State Park, along the blustery north shore of Lake Superior, there's a waterfall with what can only really be described as a party trick. The Broer River meanders along quite calmly until it hits a jagged outcrop and splits in two. One half spills down a classic Instagram-worthy cascade, whitewater, rocks, the whole works, while the other half does something rather more dramatic. It plunges straight into a dark hole in the rock called, with a certain flair for the theatrical, the Devil's Kettle. And for a surprisingly long time, no one could work out where that water was going. In a country capable of putting rovers on Mars, you'd think they'd have no trouble tracing part of the river, but the Devil's Kettle became a full-blown hydrological conundrum. Generations of researchers and backyard adventurers tried to solve it by chucking in dye, ping-pong balls, even bits of lumber, anything they could lay their hands on, hoping that they would spot them popping up downstream. But they never reappeared. It was as if the water simply slipped through a tear in the universe, gone for good. Inevitably, theories started bubbling up. Maybe the kettle connected to an ancient lava tube or some hidden underground river that quietly rejoined the Brunei miles away. Others painted stranger pictures, a vast hidden lake filled up under Minnesota waiting to explode, or a portal to somewhere else entirely, maybe another dimension. It wasn't until 2016 that anyone cracked the case properly. Hydrologists from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources did confirm that it was a portal to another dimension. They did some through-flow measurements without ping-pong balls and concluded that the water did rejoin the river, just further downstream than anyone had checked. There's no interdimensional portal. We're really sorry. There's a well-placed viewing platform where you can take it all in. The split flow, the swirling pool, the perfect dark hole swallowing half of the river as if it were nothing. And though we scientifically know where the water goes, it's still a sight to behold. So yeah, the question of where the water goes might technically be solved, but the Devil's Kettle remains mysterious and still a huge draw. If hell decided that it needed a reflecting pool, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better candidate than Lake Natron. Tucked away in northern Tanzania near the Kenyan border, this shallow, briny lake doesn't just look like something from another planet. It practically dares you to come closer. Its surface glows an eerie blood red, ringed by crusty white salt flats, and the air above it feels like you've stepped into an oven with the door left wide open. Nobody's rolling up their trousers for a paddle here. And that's just the start. The lake's vivid scarlet color comes from cyanobacteria thriving in its hyperalkaline waters. These boast a pH of over 10.5, practically as caustic as household ammonia. On top of that, temperatures can soar to beyond 49 degrees Celsius or 120 Fahrenheit, while the water stews with sodium carbonate and other minerals that trickle down from the volcanic hills surrounding it. It's chemical soup, perfect for preserving the dead, though you'd hardly call it gentle. Birds drawn to the shimmering water often mistake it for a safe landing, which is a bad choice. The lake's alkalinity burns their skin and eyes, and if they perish in the water, the minerals enshroud them, calcifying their bodies into eerie statues. Photographer Nick Brandt made this macabre magic famous, capturing images of birds frozen in mid-flight or appearing to shriek in their final moments. It's nature's accidental taxidermy and unsettlingly beautiful in a very brutal way. Maybe it's brutiful. God. Oh, I'm such a dad. Yet for all its murderous chemistry, Lake Natron is anything but lifeless. It's a lifeline, in fact, for lesser flamingos, and billions of them. They thrive in conditions that would make most living things turn around screaming, nesting on salt-encrusted islands as the water evaporates. These birds feed on the very cyanobacteria that gives the lake its red glow, making them perfectly adapted to an environment where everything else fails. Over 2 million flamingos gather here to breed, balancing delicately on an ecosystem that seems equal parts miracle and equal parts nightmare. Getting to Lake Natron isn't exactly a casual weekend drive either. You'll bump along rough tracks under a baking sun through rugged landscapes that make the desert look friendly. The journey is peppered with the sight of Maasai herders leading cattle, far more common than tourists, but when you finally glimpse that crimson sheet of water glimmering beneath the African sun, it feels like you've stumbled into a painting by Salvador Dali. Scientists monitor its extreme chemistry, ecologists worry about its vital flamingo colonies, and photographers chase its eerie beauty. But Lake Natron remains thoroughly hostile and harsh, the lake that can turn you to stone. There are dangerous places in this world. Sharp cliffs, restless volcanoes, bone-dry deserts, they could chew you up if you let them. But then there's Lake Karachay in Russia, which might kill you just for standing near it. No slip, no splash, no ill-advised swim. You don't want to go swimming here. Just breathing the air could be enough to send you packing. And by send you packing, we mean dead. This deceptively calm stretch of water, tucked away in the southern Ural Mountains, holds the honor of being one of the most radioactive places on the planet. At one point, spending a single hour on its shore was enough to kill you. Lake Karachay sits inside the Mavak Production Association, a once clandestine Soviet nuclear complex built in the late 1940s to fuel the USSR's atomic bomb project. Mayak churns out plutonium at a staggering rate, but in their rush to win the arms race, the Soviets didn't have much patience for, well, safe waste disposal. They didn't do that. So they did the simplest thing, they just dumped it in a big lake and left it there for decades. By the 1950s, Karachay wasn't so much a lake anymore, it was a radioactive stew. Workers were warned not to stand too long near its edge, while by the 1960s it was flatly recognised for what it had become, a lethal hazard. In 1990, scientists measured radiation levels topping 600 rontgens per hour, enough to kill a human in under 60 minutes. For perspective, your average yearly background exposure is less than 0.6 rontgens. And if you thought that was grim enough, it does get worse. How? In 1967, a drought dried parts of the lake, exposing radioactive sediment. Winds carried those deadly particles across hundreds of square miles, irradiating thousands of people and permanently contaminating farmlands, rivers, and forests. It was a disaster hidden under layers of Soviet secrecy, with locals left to suffer the consequences in silence. There was no news coverage, no public safety campaign, there was no mention beyond closed military briefings. Just a population caught in an invisible nightmare. Gotta love the Soviet Union. These days, Karachay has been partially entombed under concrete blocks to seal away the radioactive dust that could still take flight. Access is strictly controlled, of course, but the wider area around Mark remains pockmarked with toxic hotspots, cancer rates spiking in quiet villages, and closed zones where nature looks serene but just hums along with a background of poison. You won't find Lake Karachay on tourist leaflets or glossy Russian travel guides. There are no plaques, no scenic lookouts, no tacky gift shops. In fact, for a long time, it wasn't even shown on maps at all. The entire place was a classified secret, wiped from public records with the countless mistakes and fallout that had been left behind. We all know about Chernobyl, reactor number 4, April 26, 1968, but there's an extra layer of oddity and mystery to this. The Red Forest, as it's come to be called, is a pine woodland so saturated with radiation that its very name is a grim joke. After the disaster, the fallout was so severe that the trees surrounding the site turned rusty red almost overnight, their needles burned from the inside by intense doses of radioactive particles. In the immediate aftermath, much of the forest died standing up, a kind of woodland Pompeii. The Soviet authorities bulldozed and buried thousands of contaminated trees, but pockets of the radioactive woodland still stand today, slowly decaying under a heavy silence. Geiger counters can scream if you wave them over the ground here, and researchers in protective suits monitor the soil because the levels are still dangerously high despite more than 3 decades passing. Strangely, the Red Forest hasn't become a barren wasteland in the usual sense. Instead, wildlife has returned in numbers no one expected. Boars, wolves, wild horses, even bears have moved in to make the forest one of Europe's strangest and most dangerous nature preserves. There's something surreal about seeing a herd of horses galloping through a place where standing too long could cook you from the inside out. Visitors to the Chernobyl exclusion zone usually glimpse the Red Forest from the safety of a tour bus window. Indeed, I have. Guides will warn you not to step off the tarmac, not even for a better photo. The soil is so contaminated that a single unlucky step could stir up radioactive dust, and the forest floor is littered with hotspots that can dose you with more radiation in minutes than you'd normally see in years. It's a place that feels dangerous on a cellular level, a reminder that human disasters don't just fade away when the news cameras go home. If you do see it in person, as I have, the forest seems almost peaceful at first. Pines sway gently in the breeze, birds chat from the branches, and patches of green undergrowth creep through the trunks. But that calm is an illusion. Every living thing here carries a mark. Twisted growth on trees, mutations in insects, shortened lifespans for the animals that call it home. The Red Forest looks to the untrained eye like it's recovered. But it hasn't. It's simply adapted to a nightmare. Nature is proving astonishingly resilient. but at a terrible cost. In the Red Forest, life and death have become permanently entangled, woven with radioactive atoms that will outlast every visitor, wolf, and pine needle for centuries to come. Hidden in the wooded corners of Chestnut Ridge Park, just south of Buffalo, there's a waterfall that seems to break every rule of common sense. Eternal Flame Falls looks at first glance like any gentle little cascade that you might stumble upon during a muddy afternoon hike. Water trickling over shale, leaves rustling in the breeze. Nothing remarkable. But then you spot it. Behind the falling water, flickering like a candle, there's a flame. And it's a real flame. It's burning inside the waterfall, tucked away in a rocky alcove. And this isn't a hoax. It's not a tourist trap. The flame is genuine. You can see, smell, and you can even relight it if the wind blows it out. It burns thanks to a steady seep of natural gas leaking from cracks in the shale beneath the falls. As the gas escapes, it provides just enough fuel to keep the flame going, even while water spills over it. The whole scene feels like a contradiction that ought to short-circuit reality, fire and water side by side, coexisting as though there was nothing odd about it. Of course, Eternal might be pushing it a bit. Heavy rain or a strong gust can snuff the flame out, but hikers and curious wanderers usually step in with a light or a match to bring it back to life. So it's less a natural miracle and more a communal secret, kept alive with a bit of human help. What really gives scientists a headache is the gas itself. Natural gas, like this, usually bubbles up from hot, deep rock layers under enormous pressure, but the gas at Eternal Flame Falls is coming from relatively shallow, cool shale. Geologically speaking, that doesn't really line up. A few studies have poked around to try and solve the riddle, but so far, the mystery is only partly explained, which would kind of suit the place if you ask me. The trail to the Eternal Flame Falls is short, but often muddy, with slippery roots and sudden drops. It's not well signposted either, but you'll hear the water before you see it, and if you follow the faint tang of sulfur, you'll know you're in the right place. And there it is, a gentle ribbon of water with a steady little glow behind it. High on the Altiplano in Bolivia sprawls one of the strangest landscapes on the planet, Salar de Uyuni. It covers over 10,360 square kilometers or 4,000 square miles, a blinding white canvas that looks for all the world like the surface of an alien moon. Step onto it and you might feel that you've wandered into a dream where scale, color, and distance have all been short-circuited. But look a bit closer, and it gets even weirder. Across this pancake-flat surface, the salt fractures into nearly perfect hexagonal tiles, each a few feet wide, stretching for miles. This is nature at its symmetrical best. The pattern emerges slowly but relentlessly. During the rainy season, a thin layer of water pools across the flats, turning them into a mirror so perfect it warps your sense of up and down. Then the dry season returns, the water evaporates and the salt crystallizes, but instead of settling into random chaos, the crust contracts, pulling itself apart under subtle tension and forms polygons. It mostly forms hexagons, like cracked mud, only sharper, smoother, and cleaner. Step across them. It feels a bit like walking on a giant honeycomb, except the tiles crunch and crumble underfoot. It's beautiful, so uniform that it seems almost impossible. Scientists have tried to pin down exactly how these hexagons form with such eerie regularity. In broad strokes, the physics is no mystery. Tension, shrinkage, thermal gradients, the usual suspects, but the sheer scale and consistency still puzzle researchers. Why hexagons? Why so many? Well, it turns out hexagons are nature's efficiency experts. They tessellate perfectly, handle stress without breaking apart and spread out evenly. You see them in beehives, basalt columns, even snowflakes. And here, you see them on Bolivia's sols. And Salar is more than a pretty backdrop. It's a working landscape. People harvest salt from its edges, flamingos breed in the nearby briny pools, and one of the planet's biggest lithium reserves sits under the crust, fuel for the world's batteries and no small prize in a changing world. Yet the central parts of the flats have stayed largely untouched, a kind of unspoken peace between tourism, industry, and the scientists who come to study what happens when an entire lakebed decides to arrange itself. Visiting means braving extremes. In the day, the sun blasts off the salt with such ferocity that sunglasses are not optional, and at night the temperature nosedives, turning bone-rattlingly cold. Mysterious, weird, and wonderful. If you ever get the chance to see it, it's a place you won't forget. Over the vast waters of Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela, there's a lightning show so reliable you could practically set your watch by it. Known locally as Relampago del Catatumbo, it flickers across the night sky for 260 nights each year, unleashing as many as 280 volts an hour. No roaring thunder, no pounding rain, just bright, relentless flashes that paint the horizon with white fire night after night. The timing is nearly as eerie as the spectacle itself. Most evenings, around 7 p.m, the show kicks off, carrying on into all the small hours with a rhythm that feels almost mechanical. Sometimes the lightning erupts from a single brooding cloud, other times it sprawls across the entire sky in rolling arcs. It's been like this for centuries, a natural strobe light that's become woven into the local sense of place. And there's a good reason this lightning is so consistent, and that's got everything to do with the land. Lake Maracaibo is ringed on 3 sides by mountains, forming a kind of weather trap. During the day, the tropical sun warms the lake's surface, driving huge amounts of evaporation. That warm, saturated air then collides with cooler mountain breezes, priming the atmosphere for electrical chaos. Add to that a dose of methane bubbling up from nearby wetlands and oil fields, and you've got an unbeatable recipe for repeated, unstoppable lightning. And yet, even with all of those factors in place, no one has fully explained its perfect timing. Usually, lightning needs a trigger, cold fronts, shifting pressure, some kind of spark. Here it seems to follow its own logic, steady and dependable as a clock. Spanish galleons once navigated by the glow, using it as a natural lighthouse visible for 320 kilometers or 200 miles out to sea, a kind of beacon made of nothing but light. For Venezuela, Catatumbo lightning has become cultural. You'll see it in local poems, folktales, even emblazoned on flags. Scientists have tried to pin its secrets down, installing weather stations and peering at satellite images. They've measured its power, noting that it produces more atmospheric ozone than any other single lightning system on Earth. Though, despite what a few hopeful articles have claimed, that's not quite the same as healing the ozone layer. Out in the mid-desert lies a ghost town being devoured grain by sandy grain. Kolmanskop was once a diamond-fueled boomtown, a little slice of Germany plonked in the world's oldest desert. It had elegant villas, an ice factory, even a hospital boasting Africa's first X-ray machine, never mind that the nearest shade was miles and miles away. Today, all of that is crumbling, half buried under drifting dunes, staircases that go nowhere, bathtubs full of sand. It's a mirage turned solid and then left to rot. It all started in the early 1900s when a railway worker picked up a diamond right out of the sand. Word spread, and by 1912, Kolmanskop was turning out over 1 million carats a year. That's about 11% of the world's diamond supply at the time. And with that wealth came absurd excess. German engineers built a bowling alley. The town imported marble for mansions, stocked chandeliers, and laid out gardens in a place that barely saw rain. It made no sense. But that was part of the thrill. Luxury in the middle of a desert built on money and bravado. But diamond rushes run on luck. And Kolmanskop's luck ran out. Rich deposits further south lured the miners away in the 1930s, and by 1956, everyone had packed up and gone. The desert, never in a hurry, began to move back in. Today, whole rooms stand waist-deep in pale dunes. Door frames are half swallowed, and floorboards warped under the weight of shifting grit. Some houses still show traces of wallpaper and decorative plaster. The dry air has preserved it all surprisingly well, turning Kolmanskop into a magnet for photographers, history buffs, and anyone who likes their travel spots with a dose of apocalyptic charm. Technically, it sits inside Namibia's Spagwiet, literally forbidden zone, but guided tours keep the curious from wandering too far or stepping into a sand trap that might swallow their ankles. There's something bizarrely mesmerizing about seeing chandeliers half buried or a piano sitting on a dune like a stage left abandoned mid-performance. Each gust of wind shifts the sand, rearranging the town hour by hour, wiping away footprints and giving the place a restless, half-alive quality. Kolmanskop isn't exactly haunted, but it does feel that way. For most of the year, Grüner See in Styria looks like the kind of tidy alpine park you'd expect from rural Austria. Gravel paths lined with benches, open meadows framed by conifer-covered mountains, and clean, crisp air. It's peaceful, ordinary, even a bit dull if you're not a fan of all that alpine scenery. But then spring arrives. The snow begins to melt, and the entire place does a vanishing act. As the mountain ice thaws, meltwater rushes into the basin and swallows the park whole. Benches, walking trails, stone steps, and wooden bridges disappear up to under 11 meters or 36 feet of water, so clean and clear that it looks like glass. One day you're strolling across a meadow and the next you'd need a snorkel to visit your favourite picnic spot. What makes Grüner See so eerie and beautiful is the clarity of the water. Glacial melt has a purity to it, reflecting light in a way that turns everything below into a kind of dreamscape. Divers once glided over park benches and through submerged forests, with the water so transparent it felt like they were flying instead of swimming, suspended in a high-altitude illusion. The seasonal flooding usually hits its peak around June and then begins to drain away by late July, revealing the trails and lawns again, as though nothing ever happened. It's nature pulling off a magic trick, shifting between alpine meadow and alpine lake without any real warning. No sirens, no safety barriers, just the quiet certainty that the water will come and then it will go. For a while, it became a cult diving spot, with videos circling the internet showing swimmers navigating park benches and crossing underwater bridges. But as word spread, the delicate ecosystem started taking a beating. Fins, bubbles, and human presence were beginning to tear up fragile plants and stress the natural cycle. Local authorities stepped in, banning diving in the ecosystem in order to prevent it from collapsing under the weight of all that viral attention. These days, visitors have to admire the drowned park from on the shore. No floating past a park bench allowed. The name itself, Grüner See or Green Lake, comes from the vivid emerald color of the water. It isn't a trick of the sunlight. The grass and plants beneath keep their green life even underwater, glowing like they're waiting for a break in the flood. It feels oddly alive, a meadow that drowns then reappears, leaving behind nothing but damp footprints and the odd sense that you might have dreamed the whole thing. High up in the misty mountains of northern Luzon, the cliffs of Sagada carry a tradition that feels both haunting and strangely serene. Scattered among limestone faces, wedged into cracks or dangling from wooden pegs hammered straight into the rock, are coffins. Real coffins, some over a century old, some only a few decades old, perched dozens of feet above the ground. It's a burial practice that still feels alien, even after you know why it exists. The locals, part of the Igora culture, have been practicing this for over 2 millennia. Instead of burying their dead in the ground, they place them on the cliff sides. The reasons are blends of practicality, belief, and a dose of spiritual caution. First, the higher the body, the closer to the ancestral spirits, an easier path for the soul to rise and reunite with its elders. Second, it keeps animals and grave robbers away, which, let's face it, is a valid worry when you've spent weeks carving a beautiful wooden coffin. The coffins themselves are small, almost shockingly so, because the bodies are traditionally placed in a fetal position. It's a powerful bit of symbolism, the dead leaving the world as they came into it, curled up, compact, returning to the earth in a posture of birth and rebirth. The journey to get to these cliffs, not exactly a stroll. Visitors often trek through steep paths, through dense pine forests, down slippery steps cut into rock, following local guides who tell stories passed down through generations. The air is damp, the valleys below lush and green. When you finally stand beneath the coffins, craning your neck to see their weathered shapes, it feels more like you've entered a place of worship than a graveyard. Modern cemeteries have slowly replaced this practice in recent years, but some families still choose to follow the old ways. There's a pride in it, a kind of calm certainty that their ancestors had it right. The higher you rest, the safer you sleep. The dusty heart of Afghanistan's Bamiyan Valley, surrounded by cliffs once carved with giant Buddhas, lie the broken walls of a place with a name that still makes people shiver. Sheree Gola, literally the City of Screams, a ruined citadel perched on a hilltop, scorched and shattered nearly 800 years ago. In the 13th century, this was a thriving fortress city, a jewel of Bamiyan plain with thick defensive walls, a powerful ruler, and a strategically crucial position on the Silk Road. That prosperity drew the attention of Genghis Khan, who was in no mood to be defied. When the local king dared to resist Mongol demands, the Khan responded the only way Genghis Khan often could, with unstoppable violence. According to chronicles, the king's daughter betrayed the city's secrets after the siege dragged on, revealing where the defenders were weakest. Genghis Khan's armies stormed in, killing everyone they found. Some versions say the screams of the dying echoed across the valley for days, giving the hilltop its chilling name. What's left today is a shell of baked mud walls, toppled towers, the skeleton of a once proud city, with fractured archways and door frames that look like they've been gnawed away by centuries of wind. There are staircases that lead nowhere, courtyards with no roofs, and faint pathways winding through the rubble. If you stand there as the sun goes down, you can see how this place earned its name. Even a stray gust of wind whistling through the stones feels like a voice remembering what happened. The site is surprisingly accessible, at least compared to some of Afghanistan's more remote ruins. Visitors can climb the hill, wander through the fragmented keep, and stand where Mongol warlords once issued their terrible orders. The surrounding views are stunning. The Mamian Valley in every direction, the green river below, the cliffs where the Buddhas once stood before the Taliban destroyed them. Few tourists make it here these days for obvious reasons. It's Afghanistan, but local guides still know the stories and tell you how the walls once glowed at sunset, how people carried their trade goods up the hill for safekeeping, how the entire population was wiped out in one moment of horrific fury. There's no restoration work happening. The Taliban doesn't exactly have a branch of the National Trust, and I realize if you're not British, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a British organisation dedicated to restoring and maintaining historical buildings and monuments, so that's nice. Anyway, the Taliban, or the Afghan government for that matter, have never had too much interest in Sheree Gola, so the place sits pretty much as it fell, untouched, raw, open to the sun and the wind. A quiet place now, but once a place of suffering on an unimaginable scale. Just on the fringes of Edinburgh, in a place you'd probably drive past without a second thought, sits one of Scotland's oddest mysteries, Gilmerton Cave. At first glance, there's nothing to see, just a nondescript house on a quiet street. But step inside, and you're led down a flight of narrow stairs to an underground world that feels like someone forgot to invite daylight in for about 300 years. Gilmerton Cove is a hand-carved labyrinth of tunnels and chambers chiseled straight into the sandstone. The workmanship is surprisingly neat. Stone benches, fireplaces, even a well-finished table, all cut from solid rock. And no one can agree why. There's no record of who built it, or even exactly when, though most reckon it happened in the 18th century. Some theories suggest it was a secret drinking den for local miners. Others say it was a meeting place for the Freemasons, or even a hideout for persecuted religious groups. Or perhaps it was simply a man with a chisel who got a bit carried away. There's a room with seats set around it, like a council chamber, a chapel with a stone altar, and cubbyholes carved into the walls that look suspiciously like somewhere you'd store contraband, or a stash of whiskey perhaps. And let's be honest, this is Scotland, it's probably whiskey. What makes it stranger is how well finished everything feels. This isn't a rough makeshift shelter hacked out in desperation. The craftsmanship is steady, symmetrical, and intentional. There are even legends that tunnels once ran far beyond the current chambers, perhaps linking up with Edinburgh's vaults or hidden escape routes leading to the city centre, though no one's confirmed that with any confidence. These days, Gilmerton Cove is scheduled monument protected by Historical Environment Scotland. You can visit on a guided tour, though be prepared for the ceiling to close in a bit. Some of those tunnels feel like crawling into a foxhole, and others open out unexpectedly into rooms big enough to hold a dinner party, if you don't mind the damp. There's no ancient curse, no resident ghost rattling chains, though the tour guides wouldn't mind if you let your imagination fill in a few details. It's simply a place without an explanation. Nobody's turned up documents, nobody's left a diary, and the city archives are silent on why anyone needed a subterranean lounge carved by hand under a quiet Edinburgh suburb. In the rolling hills of southeastern Zimbabwe, surrounded by scrub and quiet farmland, sits a ruined city that once commanded power, trade, and awe on a continental scale. Great Zimbabwe, from a distance, looks like a giant jigsaw. Massive dry stone walls winding across the hill, conical towers rising up like abandoned lighthouses, entire enclosures built without a drop of mortar, yet still standing after 700 years. And that's the mystery. For centuries, people couldn't believe these walls were the work of local African builders. Great Zimbabwe came into being around the 11th century and peaked between the 13th and 15th centuries. By then, it was the beating heart of a trade network that stretched all the way to China and Persia. Archaeologists have found Chinese pottery, Persian glass, Arabian coins, all passed through these stone gates. They were carried by merchants who somehow crossed the Indian Ocean and then a fair slice of Africa. At its height, as many as 20,000 people lived here, which is no small number when you remember that this is medieval southern Africa, miles from the nearest big port. The architecture is the major draw. Dry stone walling consists of stacked granite blocks carefully trimmed and fitted without cement, creating sweeping curves that still look crisp centuries later. The great enclosure alone is more than 240 meters or 800 feet around, with a conical tower inside that no one agrees on. Was it a granary, a ritual shrine, or a royal symbol? Just take your pick, no one knows. Of course, when European explorers stumbled across the ruins in the 19th century, they flatly refused to believe that Africans had built them. Of course they did. They invented all sorts of wild theories about Phoenicians, Arabs, even the Queen of Sheba swooping down for a spot of empire building. It took decades of digging and plenty of uncomfortable admissions before scholars finally accepted that the ancestors of the Shona people had engineered it. Today you can still wander through Great Zimbabwe's broken walls, climbing the narrow passages between stacked granite, imagining the chatter of markets and the clank of ironsmiths at work. There's no roped-off tourist polish. The place feels raw, living in its own dust. Lizards scuttle along the pathways where nobles once paraded, and baobabs have pushed their roots into gaps between the stones. There's no sign telling you exactly what went on here, no grand interpretive plaque with all the answers, and honestly, that's part of the draw. The city's rise and fall, why it was abandoned, and what every tower and wall really meant, still leave space for countless questions. In the canals of Xochimilco, just south of Mexico City, a patch of land might be the strangest tourist attraction you'll ever stumble across. Isla de las Muñecas, the island of dolls, looks harmless enough from a distance, just a small man-made island among dozens like it. But if you get closer, you'll see why people keep coming back with a mixture of fascination and unease. There's hundreds of dolls, some nailed to trees, some tied to fence posts, some dangling on bits of string like morbid Christmas baubles. Most are missing eyes or limbs, their faces warped by sun and rain. They hang above stagnant canals, heads lolling, staring blankly at the tourists who drift past in bright painted boats. The story goes back to the 1950s, when a man named Don Julian Santana moved to the island. According to local legend, he found the body of a young girl who drowned in the canals, and shortly after, a doll floated by. Don Julian hung it in a tree to honor her spirit, or maybe to ward it off. Then another doll appeared, and another. He started collecting them from rubbish heaps, convinced that the girl's ghost was unsettled and needed company. Over time, the dolls took over. Every branch, every doorway, every beam sprouted a plastic limb or a decaying baby doll. Don Julian kept going for decades, maintaining this eerie tribute until he died in 2001, apparently in the same canal where the girl had drowned. That predictably only deepened the island's legends. These days, the island is open to visitors. Another one I've been to. You can ride a brightly painted boat along the waterways and then hop off to explore the islands. But it's not for the faint-hearted. The dolls sway in the breeze, their hair matted, their skin flaking away. Some have insects living inside their heads, which it's pretty horror movie-ish, isn't it? Despite all the stories, there's no hard proof that the drowned girl ever existed. The official records don't mention her, and plenty of locals say Don Julian simply made the tale up after a life spent alone. But in a place like this, facts kind of matter less than atmosphere. If you're expecting a big dramatic ghost encounter, you'll be disappointed because ghosts are not real. The quiet of the canals, the gentle lapping of water against the boat, the sudden brush of a plastic hand against your shoulder, that's enough. It's time to go. Deep in the woodlands of northeastern Ohio, where the Cuyahoga Valley National Park now sprawls, sits a place with a name so on the nose it sounds laughable. Helltown. It sounds made up, a name designed to sell ghost tours or scare teenagers, but it's real, though the truth is maybe murkier and stranger than the legends. In the 1970s, the US government began buying up land in the tiny community of Boston, Ohio, intending to expand parkland around the Cuyahoga River. Residents were forced out, their homes bought under eminent domain, and the town emptied practically overnight. The problem was that the government didn't bulldoze everything. They left abandoned homes standing, windows boarded, driveways cracked and overgrown, and half-finished playgrounds. The result was a picture-perfect stage for local horror stories. It's not the first time people were forced out of Helltown. The original inhabitants were members of the Mingo tribe, and later the Lenape, who lived there until 1782, when tensions boiled over and 96 pacifist Moravian Christian Indians were massacred by the Pennsylvania militia nearby. If you needed a tragic story to bolster an already eerie location, well, there it is for you. People started calling it Helltown because when you walk through a once normal neighborhood that looks like its people were snatched away mid-sentence, your brain is going to do the rest. Rumors piled up. There were stories of satanic cults in the old church, which creepily had its cross turned upside down, government experiments in toxic waste, mutants lurking in the woods. Some even claim the national park designation was just a cover-up for a chemical spill. There's no good evidence for any of that, but if you visit, it's easy to see why the story's stuck. Fog clings to the hollowed-out streets in autumn. Deer pick their way between wrecked sheds, and the leftover road signs point to nowhere. A church on a hill seems permanently shuttered, with twisted pews still inside. A rotting school bus stands as if waiting for children who never came back. Noises, branches snapping, the winds, the occasional owl, somehow get twisted in your head into something worse. Park authorities have done their best to clear out some of the houses, but the myth of Helltown is hard to kill. Urban explorers sneak through at night, hoping to catch sight of ghosts, Satanists, mutants, or whatever other story they've heard. Some get a ticket for trespassing, others just get a scare. Locals, for their part, tend to roll their eyes. Most of them know this was a normal town torn down for a national park with nothing more sinister than poor planning and an abrupt government buyout. But you can't entirely dismiss the sense that something feels off. Abandoned towns do that to you. They mess with your sense of time, like you've stepped into a world the living forgot. Hidden away in a quiet corner of Saxony, in the leafy Rakotzbrücke, stands an improbable bridge with a sinister origin story. Rakotzbrücke, better known as the Devil's Bridge, arches in a perfect semicircle over a still pond, creating a flawless stone ring when reflected on the water below. It's the kind of geometry that feels unsettling, like nature and architecture have agreed on a symmetry so precise it can't possibly be human. The bridge dates back to the 19th century, when a local noble commissioned it as part of a landscaped fantasy park. But the craftsmanship was so astonishing, its stones balanced with razor-thin precision, the arch so delicate you'd think a stiff wind could snap it, that it was soon folded into local legend. People decided no mortal hands could have built it. It had to be the devil's work, traded for the soul of the first person to cross it. That kind of story pops up all over Europe, of course, whenever medieval masons did something a bit too clever for the neighbors to process. But Rakotzbrücke really does look otherworldly, even if you know the story's just a bit of nonsense. It was never meant to carry wagons or armies. It was always decorative, designed purely to amaze. The result is that it doesn't look worn down or patched up like most medieval bridges, but stands eerily pristine, like a forgotten prop from a fairy tale that no one dares to touch. Over the years, moss and lichen have crept across the basalt spars and stone balustrades, softening the edges and making it feel even older than it is. When the pond is still and the light hits just right, the bridge and its mirror image form a perfect circle, so uncanny you half expect something to crawl out of the water. These days, you can't actually cross the Devil's Bridge, it's too fragile, and authorities don't want it collapsing under a tourist stampede. Instead, visitors have to settle for a view from the banks, which might be for the best. Seeing it from a distance, framed by trees and reflected in the pond, it keeps the illusion intact. Step too close and it only ruins the magic. In the green, rain-soaked fields of County Meath, there's a grassy mound that looks at first like nothing more than a gentle hill, but if you step closer, you'll see a white quartz wall snaking around its base and a strange stone entrance. This is Newgrange, a Neolithic passage tomb built over 5,000 years ago, making it older than Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza. The structure is a marvel of engineering and mystery. An 80-meter or 260-foot passage runs straight into the mound, ending in a central chamber lined with massive slabs covered in swirling spiral carvings. No one's entirely sure what they mean. Some think they mark the path of the sun, others see symbols of life and death. And the roof is dry-laid stones, perfectly angled to stay watertight for 5 millennia. The place is so solid you could stand through an Irish monsoon in there and barely get damp. But the truly astonishing bit happens every winter solstice. For a few days, around 21st of December, as the sun rises, its first rays shine through a special opening above the doorway, the roof box, and pierce straight down the passage to illuminate the inner chamber. It is an event so precisely aligned that it still works today, 5,000 years later, provided the clouds behave. I mean, this is Ireland. So think about all that. Neolithic builders with nothing more than stone tools managed to measure, cut, and place each block so that one perfect beam of sunlight could strike the darkest heart of the tomb on the darkest day of the year. Some people have debated why. Some say it marked a time of rebirth, a promise that the light would return. Others suggest it was a show of power, proof that the builders could tame even the sun. Whatever the motive, it's hard to stand inside on December morning and not feel a chill down your spine. Newgrange was lost to memory for centuries, buried under grass and legend before being excavated and restored in the 20th century. Today you can tour the passage, squeeze through its low doorway, and trace your fingers over those strange spirals. On solstice mornings, a small lottery allows a few lucky witnesses to see the sun's alignment, though most settle for a simulation the rest of the year. It's hard to imagine the world that built Newgrange. Farming settlements, stone axes, no written language, yet somehow enough vision to line up a monument with the sun's movements. Scattered across the windswept coastal regions of Ostrobothnia. Doesn't sound like a real place, but I guess it is. In western Finland lie the remains of something the locals have long called the Giants' Churches. Despite the name, they aren't churches in a traditional sense, nor as far as we know were they built by giants. Giants aren't real. What they are is a series of enormous stone enclosures, some up to 60 meters or 200 feet long, laid out in neat rectangles with low walls and carefully placed entrances. They date back around 5,000 years, and no one really knows why they were built. More than 40 of these structures are dotted along the Finnish coast, all constructed during a relatively short window of the Neolithic era. Some stand inland today, but at the time they were built, the shoreline would have been right on their doorstep, thanks to land uplift after the Ice Age. Their placement is precise, usually on a slight rise close to where ancient brackish waters met solid ground, a kind of in-between space that feels almost ritualistic. Archaeologists have thrown plenty of theories at the giants' churches. Some see them as ceremonial gathering sites, places to mark the passing of the seasons, or the movements of fish shoals that people relied on. Others think they could have been enormous communal houses meant for shared rituals or feasts. The name church itself is actually much later invention, stuck on by local people trying to make sense of a structure that felt too big and deliberate to be just a hut or some sort of fence. Walk among the stones today and it's clear these weren't knocked together on a whim. The walls are made of boulders stacked with surprising care, their lines still straight after millennia of harsh Finnish weather. Some of the larger enclosures have central pits which might have held fires or posts or something more symbolic entirely. It's the kind of design that suggests purpose, even if time has stripped away every clue about what that purpose was. On a lonely stretch of highway just outside of Leh, in the high desert of Ladakh, there's a hill that seems to break the rules of gravity. It's known as Magnetic Hill, and drivers swear their cars roll uphill here. Engines off, gears in neutral, hands off the steering wheel. Watching a vehicle creep up a slope without a push feels like a glitch in reality, the sort of optical prank that leaves you blinking. So, what's going on here? Well, the legend is actually simple enough. Locals have long told visitors about a powerful magnetic force hidden in the hillside, strong enough to drag cars, even aircraft, off of their intended course. Over the years, the story picked up momentum. Military pilots supposedly steered wide of the hill, worried it would target their equipment. Tourists still turn up, keen to test their luck, cutting the engine and holding their breath as their vehicles appear to inch uphill all on their own. Of course, there is a less fantastical explanation. Magnetic Hill is a textbook example of a gravity hill, where the lay of the surrounding landscape creates an optical illusion. The horizon is obscured by distant ridges and the slope of the road, so what looks like an uphill gradient is actually a subtle downhill one. Your eyes, trained by a lifetime of level streets and proper lines, get fooled. The brain tells you the car is rolling uphill, when in truth, gravity is doing exactly what it's always done, pulling you down the gentlest of declines. But facts hardly spoil the fun. The place still has a reputation that draws curious road trippers and Instagram adventurers in droves. They film the moment the car begins to move, arguing with each other about whether it's magnets or spirits or, science, pointing fingers at dusty roadside signs with half-faded letters spelling out Magnetic Hill. A line of motorbikes sometimes queues up behind them, engines switched off, eager to join the demonstration. Locals have long leaned into the mystery. And who can blame them for wanting to make a quick buck or two? Shops and guides trade on the name, selling stories to go with the physics. It's a good story, and many people want to believe in something weird lurking behind a bare patch of highway. Whether you want to be clinically scientific or a little otherworldly, Magnetic Hill still stops people in their tracks. One of those quirks that is just kind of fun, really. Just off Japan's southern coast, beneath the churn of the East China Sea, sits a structure that really shouldn't exist, at least not in the form it takes. It's called the Yonaguni Monument, and depending on who you ask, it's either the smoking gun of a lost civilization or a fancy pile of underwater rocks pretending to be a city. The whole thing was stumbled upon by accident in 1986 when a local diver went looking for hammerhead sharks and found himself staring at what looked suspiciously like a submerged staircase. Why would you go looking for sharks, you psycho? Not a pile of rubble, not a coral-covered outcrop, but what appeared to be terraces, steps, platforms, and eerily geometric angles. It's roughly 50 meters or 165 feet long and 20 meters or 65 feet wide, and parts of it look so precise you'd half expect to find a plaque saying, "Welcome to Old Yonaguni, established 10,000 BC. Supporters of the man-made theory have had a field day. They argue it's evidence of an ancient civilization, possibly Lemuria, Atlantis' less famous conspiracy-prone sibling. Some claim it's older than the pyramids, pointing to chisel-like marks, rectangular layouts, and what they swear is a turtle-shaped carving. Local folklore helps too, with tales of lost land swallowed by the sea, lending just enough mythos to keep things spicy. Geologists, however, are far less enchanted. They reckon it's all natural, a product of sandstone fracturing from tectonic activity. After all, Japan does sit on the Ring of Fire, and earthquakes have a habit of snapping things into straight lines. They argue that nature isn't just capable of making sharp edges, it does it all the time, even underwater. One scientist called it a pareidolia in scuba gear, the human brain's way of turning a rock into a temple because it's had too much imagination and not enough oxygen. Still, diving down to see it is a genuinely surreal experience. The structure looms out of the deep like a half-loaded video game render, angular, massive, oddly deliberate. Whether it's the lighting, the currents, or the sheer weirdness of seeing something so architectural where fish ought to be, it messes with your sense of scale and logic. No one's managed to prove definitively what it was, which, let's be honest, makes it all the more appealing. The Yonaguni Monument still sits in that delightful grey area between geology and legend, part science, part mythology. Deep in the swamps and the tangled rainforests of the Republic of Congo, a patch of water has fired the imagination of explorers for nearly a century. Known broadly as Mokele-mbembe territory, this network of rivers and lakes, especially Lake Tele, is where people swear a dinosaur still lives. Not a crocodile, not a hippo, a living, breathing, real dinosaur. The legend is simple and tantalizing if you want to throw much of respected paleontology out of the window. It's that a creature with a long neck, a bulbous body, and a powerful tail is moving through the water with silent confidence, occasionally emerging to graze along the shore before slipping back below the surface. Its name, Mokele-mbembe, roughly translates as one who stops the flow of rivers, and it's been described in local folklore for generations. When Western explorers arrived in the early 20th century, they found villagers who swore this beast was no fable. It was real, dangerous, and best left alone. Over the years, expeditions have carried cameras, sonar gear, and open mines into the Congolese swamps, hoping to glimpse this supposed Jurassic Park survivor. Footprints the size of dinner plates have been photographed, and reports are filtered out of enormous ripples on otherwise calm lakes. But hard evidence has always proved stubbornly elusive. There's no reliable photograph, no preserved carcass, no bones, just stories. A lot of stories. Scientists are skeptical, of course. The region teems with hippos, crocodiles, and massive fish, any of which could spark a tall tale in the half-light of dawn. Add to that the human tendency to see patterns and monsters where there might only be a splash, and you've got a recipe for a modern myth. But the Mokele-mbembe refuses to go away. Every so often, another explorer takes a punt on finding it, convinced that if dinosaurs survived anywhere, it would be in a place as vast, murky, and understudied as the Congo Basin. Lake Tele itself is a hard place to reach. The roads are more suggestion than infrastructure, the jungle an ever-shifting wall of green, and the water home to snakes, biting insects, and anything else that likes to chew on the careless. Local guides will still tell you stories of Mokele-mbembe if you ask, describing how it bellows, overturns canoes, and vanishes into reed beds so thick they could hide a whale. Whether they believe it is a real animal or a spiritual protector, that's sometimes hard to separate, but either way, it's certainly respected in the region. Lake Tele remains one of those spots where the line between folklore and cryptozoology gets beautifully blurry. Just on the outskirts of Cluj-Napoca in Transylvania, yep, Dracula's lair itself, lies a stretch of woodland that gives even the locals the jitters. Hoia Baciu forest isn't especially vast, at around only 700 acres, nor is it buried in remote wilderness. Yet it's earned a reputation as Romania's very own Bermuda Triangle. Locals tend to avoid it, while tourists, thrill seekers, and the occasional wannabe ghost hunter can't seem to get enough. And once you step under that warped canopy, it's not hard to see why curiosity wins out. The trees don't stand like normal trees. Their trunks twist in bizarre arcs, with some bending back toward the ground as though trying to crawl away, while others spiral round and round until they look positively tortured. The whole forest seems to have been drawn by a child who never learned straight lines, or maybe by nature having a bit of a breakdown no one bothered to address. And no, it's not just one or two odd specimens, it's all of them. Then you come across the clearing. Right in the middle of Hoia Baciu is a near-perfect circle stripped bare of any vegetation, no grass, no weeds, no straggly bushes clinging on for dear life, just nothing. Soil tests haven't turned up anything strange, no poisons or radiation, but plants just refuse to grow there, as if the earth has lost interest in hosting anything living. Visitors say their cameras glitch out, photos return with blurs or strange light streaks, and devices fail without warning. And people talk about dizziness, nausea, or the uncanny sense of something standing behind them, staring. The forest first made international waves back in the 1960s after a military technician snapped a photo of what he swore was a flying saucer hovering over the canopy. The image hit newspapers around the world, setting off a new wave of visitors who came searching for UFOs, ghosts, or simply a decent story. Since then, the place has been a magnet for documentaries, paranormal investigations, and a fair number of influencers who fancy themselves the next ghost-hunting superstar. Reports range from the mild to the properly weird. People swear they hear voices drifting through the air, footsteps crunching over leaves that no one's there to step on, or bursts of laughter echoing through the gloom. Others talk of darting shadows or sudden flashes of light. One particularly strange legend tells of a 5-year-old girl who vanished into the forest only to reappear years later in the same clothes, unchanged, with no idea that she'd even been missing. True? No, probably not, but Hoia Baciu has a way of making you doubt what's real. Despite its sinister reputation, the forest stays open to hikers, cyclists, and anyone else with nerves of steel. And you can even book a guided night tour if you really want to get stuck in. Most visitors walk out with little more than a handful of mosquito bites and a moody Instagram reel, but a few leave with the unsettling certainty they saw something they shouldn't have. Off the eastern shore of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia lies a city that looks like something dreamt up by a half-mad storyteller. Nan Madal, an ancient complex of stone buildings and ceremonial platforms built across more than 90 tiny artificial islets, seems to float just above the ocean, separated by a network of tidal canals. It's sometimes called the Venice of the Pacific, but that's selling it short. Venice is busy and romantic. Nan Madal is quiet and brooding. Construction began around the 8th century and ramped up over the next 500 years. The builders used massive prismatic basalt columns, some weighing as much as 50 tons, stacking them like logs to form walls that rise straight from the shallow coral reef. There are tomb enclosures, ritual houses, sacred pools, and great platforms where priests and chiefs once ruled. From a distance, the grey stone blends with green mangroves and the endless sea, giving it the look of a half-sunken fortress out of myth. No one's exactly sure how these stones were transported. Pohnpei has no great quarry on the shore. The basalt columns came from inland, meaning workers had to haul them down rugged mountains through dense jungle and somehow float them out to sea. Oral traditions claim the stones were moved by magic, with sorcerers levitating them into place. That's probably a bit much, but even a more mundane explanation doesn't dull the achievement. In fact, it probably enhances it, doesn't it? An engineering feat so extreme it still puzzles archaeologists. Nan Madal served as the ritual and political hub of the Salar dynasty, which governed Pohnpei for centuries. It was a seat of power, carefully laid out to separate nobles from commoners, surrounded by a kind of mystical moat that protected its spiritual purity. Priests performed ceremonies to maintain cosmic order, while chiefs enforced absolute authority over the islands. By the 17th century, Nan Madal was abandoned. The Salar dynasty fell, its rulers overthrown by local rivals, and the canals began to clog with silt. Trees took root in the walls, storms punched holes through the islets, and what was once the seat of Micronesian power slowly turned into a half-drowned ruin. Yet it never entirely disappeared. Even today, villagers in Pompeii speak of the place with a respectful wariness, convinced it still holds spirits that guard or curse anyone who enters without permission. If you visit now, you'll find no grand interpretive centre or neat footpaths, just stone walls crumbling into black water, tangles of mangrove roots, and silent channels running between islands that once saw priests carried in sacred canoes. You could drift through these canals, the water dark and glassy, looking up at the stones placed by hands that worked in secret, following rules that no one remembers. On the edge of Rajasthan's Aravalli Hills, surrounded by dry scrub and silent, weather-beaten stones, stands Bhangar Fort, a place so tangled in ghost stories that the Indian government itself warns you away after sunset. Built in the 17th century by Raja Madho Singh, Bhangar was once a thriving fortress down with temples, palaces, bazaars, and pleasure gardens. Today, it's a ruin half swallowed by the hills and carries a reputation as one of India's most haunted places. The rules are strict. No one is allowed to stay inside the fort walls between dusk and dawn. Official signs posted by the Archaeology Survey of India advise visitors to leave before night falls, and even local villagers keep their distance. If you ask them why, you'll get a stream of stories that sound straight out of a horror script. Curses, witches, black magic, entire armies wiped out by spells gone wrong. One of the most popular legends tells of a tantric, kind of sorcerer, who fell in love with the beautiful princess of Bhangar. She rejected him, so he cursed the entire town in his dying rage. From that moment, the city was doomed, and its people were destined to die or vanish. Historians would say invasions, droughts, and politics ended Bhangar, but folk memory likes a simpler, darker answer. Walking through the gates today, you'll see why the place grips people's imagination. The old marketplace still has crumbling shops, their arches twisted, weeds climbing over broken stalls. The palace rises behind them in tiers of stone, parts of its walls so eroded that they look like they might collapse in the next monsoon. There are temples dedicated to Shiva, Gopinath, and Hanuman, all hushed and echoing, their steps worn thin by centuries of feet. And no matter how busy the daytime visitors get, there's a silence hanging over the fort that feels wrong somehow. Plenty of ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and curious tourists push the rules, sneaking in after dark to see what happens. They usually come back with stories of a sudden chill, a woman's laugh echoing through the ruined palace, shadows that move where there's nothing to cast them. Some don't even make it past the courtyard before they lose their nerve and sprint back through the massive stone gates. The official line is that Bhangar is dangerous after dark simply because of the terrain, wild animals, open wells, unstable masonry, but that doesn't stop the myths. In a country full of old forts, Bhangar is the only one with a government-enforced curfew based on superstition. That, if nothing else, tells you how serious its reputation has become. If you visit by day, you'll find a place that's strangely beautiful in its decay, with monkeys swinging through the battlements and bright saris flashing among the grey walls. But as the light begins to fade, even the monkeys slip away, the fort empties, and the shadows gather. High in the dizzying altitude of La Paz, where the Andes seem to squeeze the sky itself, there's a street that looks like a cross between a street market and a scene from a folk horror film. This is Mercado de las Brujas, the Witches' Market, a row of stalls where you can buy everything from dried herbs to spells to powders for luck and curses to, dried llama fetuses. If you've ever wondered where you might pick up a toad in a jar or a charm to ward off your cheating neighbor, here's your answer. It's not a theme park, this is a working market woven into Bolivia's deep-rooted Amara beliefs. For many locals, the line between daily life and the spiritual world is very thin, and the witches, known as yatiris, are respected, even necessary. They act as healers, intermediaries, and wise folk who know which rituals to call on when things go sideways. As in a place where city politics, mining booms, and fragile family fortunes can flip on a coin toss, you can see why a little extra insurance from the spirit world might seem sensible. The llama fetuses are probably the first thing visitors fixate on. They hang from stalls like something out of a nightmare, legs tucked against their bellies, fur still clinging to their tiny frames. They aren't for shock value, they're offerings to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. Builders bury them in the foundations of new houses or bridges, a kind of spiritual bribe to ensure the land stays calm and the structures stand. Some families do the same before major business ventures, asking Pachamama to keep prosperity flowing. Beyond the llama offerings, the witches' stalls overflow with amulets, carved talismans, powders, dried insects, and ritual dolls, love spells, luck spells, fertility charms, everything you might imagine, and plenty you wouldn't. It's a place that feels alive with possibilities, where the Aymara worldview mingles with Catholic saints and a touch of modern business savvy. If you talk to the Itiris, they'll explain the difference between a good charm and a dangerous one, between a blessing and a curse. They'll measure your energy, burn herbs to clear your path, and offer advice that ranges from the practical to the really downright mystical. Here, magic isn't tucked away in books or fairy tales. It's for sale, out in the open, trading in the Bolivian sun. Just off the coast of Amami Oshimi Island in southern Japan, beneath the waves, something extraordinary appears on the ocean floor. Perfectly symmetrical circles etched into the sand, scalloped like lacework and stretching over 2 meters or 6 feet across, decorated with feathered ridges and radiating lines so precise you'd think a compass was involved. Divers first spotted them decades ago, and naturally, imagination ran wild. Aliens, underwater spirits, a particularly ambitious octopus with an eye for abstract art. The truth, of course, is far stranger and also so much simpler. The circles are the work of a pufferfish, no bigger than your hand, with the soul of an architect and apparently the patience of a monk. The male pufferfish, keen to impress a mate, spends days, sometimes the better part of a week, fanning, scooping, and shaping the seabed with the meticulous flair of a miniature builder. He crafts ridges, digs channels, and even sprinkles the outer rim with bits of shell and coral to create contrast. And it isn't just for show. These grooves and peaks are cunning bits of engineering. They help moderate ocean currents, creating a safe, calm space where eggs can be laid without being smothered by silt or swept away. The radial symmetry directs water flow evenly through the nest like a living filtration system disguised as a geometric wonder. Until the 2010s, nobody had ever captured this ritual on camera, proof that sometimes nature is quietly at work under our noses and we're none the wiser. What makes it even more astonishing is the scale of the effort compared to the fish itself. Picture a house cat sculpting a grand cathedral with its paws. That's the level of commitment this pufferfish is up to. If a female approves of his sandy construction, she'll lay her eggs in the center. If not, well, tough luck. He wipes the slate clean and starts again from scratch, repeating the dance until someone takes notice. There's something truly beautiful about it all. The fish isn't crunching equations like a human engineer, yet its instincts produce patterns worthy of a Renaissance artist. Symmetry, proportion, repetition, all delivered with a sense of grace that you'd never expect from a spiny little sea creature. Of course, the ocean doesn't care for fish art. The waves eventually reclaim these delicate masterpieces, erasing them like chalk drawings in a rainstorm. And that perhaps makes them even more remarkable. Each circle soon vanishes, a sand mandala built by fins instead of fingers. Deep in the lush jungles and old banana plantations of Costa Rica's Diquís Delta lie hundreds of bizarre stone objects that feel dropped in from another world. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, or Las Bolas, are near perfect granite or gabbro balls, ranging in size from a few inches to over 2 meters across and weighing up to 16 tons. Some are so flawlessly shaped that they look like they were spun on a lathe, despite being carved around 1500 years ago with tools no more sophisticated than stone hammers and fire. No one knows exactly why they were made. The spheres have been linked to the pre-Columbian Diquís culture, but beyond that, their meaning remains stubbornly opaque. Were they status symbols, astronomical markers, territorial boundary stones? No written records survive, and the oral histories were lost long ago, disrupted by colonization and plantation development. Their arrangement, sometimes in straight lines, sometimes in triangular groupings, sometimes alone, only deepens the puzzle. When the spheres first turned up in the 1930s, workers clearing banana plantations pushed them aside with bulldozers or dynamited them to look for gold rumored to be hidden inside. The damage was enormous, but enough survived to spark international fascination. Archaeologists swooped in, measuring their diameters with calipers, testing their rock for tool marks, and trying to map their original positions. But the function behind them remains speculative at best. There's a strange sense of precision here. The surface is astonishingly smooth, weathered, but still symmetrical, like a museum piece misplaced in the jungle. Their near-perfect sphericity has been studied and rechecked, always raising more questions than it answers. Who decided a giant granite ball was worth shaping? How did they move these things through dense tropical forest? And why devote so much effort to something that appears to have no practical purpose? The Costa Rican government has protected many of the spheres, placing some in museums while leaving others where they were found. But their mystery is part of the appeal. There's no elaborate mythology surrounding them, no clear inscription to decode, just these blank, beautiful forms sitting under the sun, silent as ever. If you visit the sites around Palma Sur or Finca 6, you'll see them resting where the jungle left them, framed by tangled vines and the buzz of cicadas, one of our world's estranged mysteries that we may never properly understand. So that's it, 50 places. Hope you liked them, and I'll see you next time. It was a long video. I'm going to go have a drink.